Hello, and welcome to Temple of the Pulse Pod, where our decks are not optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun. I'm Andy.
I'm Bruce.
Oh, there we go. That's better. Welcome to episode 68. Since it's, episode 8 of a season, we've got a deck tale. Woo! Did I do it right? Yeah. Okay.
Close enough.
This deck is one of my newer decks.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen this one a few times, but not that often.
Right.
Because when I did get a look at the list, there were a bunch of cards on there that I had no idea were there.
It's funny, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, but there have been a few cards, like a handful of cards, that I've seen more in this deck, like at least once a game. I even had somebody point out, like, how do you always draw that card? Well,
it's a gift.
The deck is Laelia, the Blade Reforged. I've dubbed this deck Exile at any cost, Commander damage at any cost. She's a legendary creature Spirit Warrior for red and 2. She's a 2/2 with haste. It says, whenever Laelia, the Blade Reforged, attacks, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. So just like a little nice impulse draw right off the bat. And then whenever you exile one or more cards from your library and or graveyard, put a +1/+1 counter on Laelia.
Right. So it's very easy to look at the 2/2 and think that this is just a small commander. But the first time you're swinging, it's already a 3/3.
Yeah.
And it's just, the first time you swing, it's at least a 3/3.
Oh, yeah.
The card gets the +1/+1 counter whenever you exile a card, and there's more than just Laelia doing that. So this thing gets big real fast.
Oh, yeah.
As someone who's been on the wrong side of a Laelia swing. Or two.
The first couple times I took a swing at this deck, it really... it's tough because, I mean, she's 3 mana, so you want to play it on turn 3.
Right.
I mean, turn 2 would be cool, but...
Yep.
And you want to immediately attack. But say you play her on turn 3, you, like, on curve... you put your third land down, played her,
right.
And then you flip the top card to exile it. Oh, and it's a land. Well, then you can't play it. It stays exiled.
Right.
But, I mean, the more I've played with this deck, and I'll talk about this a little later, the more I realize that does not matter at all.
Right.
You've got 99 cards to churn through. There's no way you're getting to the bottom. Hopefully, you should have enough land. I've got 40 in this deck, that you're not just going to exile every single one of them. That would be rotten luck. And if you do that, you're not going to do it twice. So
given that, just sort of on a more general level, how do you compare this kind of card draw, and I use that in quotes, to regular card draw? Because you're not getting the land. So 40% of the time, you're getting a land. So 40% of the time, you're not getting a card draw. But the other time when you are getting a card draw, it's a card you have to play that turn.
Right.
So, given that restriction, how do you do you see this as, a third of a card draw, or half of a card draw, or I don't, because I know that. Like when you talk about scry,
right.
People regularly say scry is like a half a card draw, because you're not getting to draw the card, but you're improving the card that you're likely going to draw. You look at the top card, no, that's not something I want. You put it underneath her, ooh, that's exactly what I want, and leave it right there. So how does that work with this one?
I would say with normal impulse draw, which is when you exile X number of cards and you can play it this turn, or they're starting to make a lot of that until the end of your next turn. This one is this turn, but they're making it, or I don't really see it much as card draw in those other scenarios, because you have to pay for it. And let's say act on impulse, 3 mana, sorcery, exile top 3 cards of your library until the end of turn. You may play until end of turn. You may play cards exiled this way. So, like, for 3 mana, you exile 3 cards, which is cool. You've got a selection from those 3 cards. It's definitely card draw. But because it's stays exiled if you don't play any of them.
Right.
Or if you don't play it, then it kind of like this is why it's questionable whether it's card draw or not. But because Laelia's ability is just on attack, it's free. It's free impulse draw, so it is generally going to be part of your hand. The field bads come where you've already played a land, or you don't have enough mana. And sure. Honestly, what that kind of comes down to then is just letting it go. I would say that the impulse draw you get from her attack trigger is just as good as any other card draw. I would say it helps you slow down in your own habits and make you more intentionally do things in your second main phase than in your first main phase. Because if it is a land, or if it's, say, Embercleave, obviously you're going to play it during combat. Right. But if it's something, high costed like that, then playing things in your first main phase kind of counteracts being able to play things in your second main phase,
right?
Including the card that you're drawing.
Yeah. See, and just with what you're describing, mm-hmm. It reminds me why I'm not playing Laelia and why you are. Mostly because for me to keep pace in a game, mm-hmm. I spend way too much time staring at my cards, and to try and stop my turns from being super long, I try and do a lot of that while other people are playing their turns. So I plan out what I want to do on my turn, and I work it, and then when my turn comes, I draw the card, I look at the card, I'm like, does this change my plan at all? I give it 5 seconds. No. Go ahead. You've got that same, you could try to do the same thing and look at the card draw and say, does that change my plans? No. But then you get it again every time Laelia attacks.
Yeah.
So really, the plans with the Laelia deck, and I've seen you do this, you're clearly going down one path, then you flip the card and it's like, play it now or lose it. And I watch you just pivot, and you'll do
alternate.
Make a 90-degree turn. Okay, we're going this way now. Now we're doing this. And for me, that would be very difficult. I would be looking at that card going, okay, and then I'm going to spend the next 4 minutes staring at this, trying to figure out what am I supposed to do. And this is all while I'm attacking you. So hang on a second. Don't declare blockers. Let me think about how this affects what I'm going to do. And I just play too slowly for that. So
yeah. And I think that while I think it really harnesses my approach of, all right, I'm just going to do this on the fly. Yeah. But I think too, it helps that, for the most part, I've got 6 instances. There we go. I've got 6 instances of instance in the deck, and then I've got, for sorceries, 7. So the fact that
so 6 things you could be doing during your combat, right, with whatever card you flip, if that's one of the cards.
Yeah. So everything else I have to do second main phase if I flip it. So there's not much changing during combat, so unless I've got it in hand already. Right. And I think that the idea here with Laelia is, one, getting damage in early.
Yeah.
The fact that she's 3 mana, you can get her out on turn 2 pretty reliably, you can definitely get her out on 3 extremely reliably. Yeah. Attack anyone.
Right. You're going to find somebody who can't block.
Immediately get 3 commander damage in, and then from there, mold the idea of your game to attacking who is the biggest threat, and trying to make Laelia either unblockable or have trample.
Right.
she can get really big fairly quickly. So the thought behind building this deck was finding any card that had the word Exile on it, and then narrowing it down from there, figuring out if it needs to exile either from my library or from my graveyard.
Right.
It can't exile from my hand. It can't exile to trigger, it can't exile from my hand. It can't exile from other people's libraries, graveyards, etc. The battlefield. But that said, I think there's some super cool cards that end up just by happenstance exiling from one of those two places without really kind of noticing from the onset.
Well, let's jump into some of those.
The first place my mind went was Cascade, because generally the Cascade says when you cast this spell, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card that costs less. You may cast it without paying its mana cost. Put the exiled cards on the bottom of your library in a random order. So the biggest thing to note there is a lot of the things in this deck, if you're exiling more than one card, it is all one trigger. Here, because you're exiling until you do something, it's a number of instances of exiling. So Cascade is great because it will be how many ever you flip from the top until you get to the thing.
Okay, so with Cascade, you're not going to get a chance to play the cards, but Laelia gets the plus and counters. Is that how that one works?
Yeah. Okay. So you'll be, because you're literally exiling from the top of your library. Yeah. Say you exile the top 7 cards, the 7th card is cost less. You can play that, but you'll still get the 7+1s.
Yeah.
So I've got a few Cascade things in here. Boarding Party, Creative Technique, Maelstrom Colossus. Actually, Creative Technique isn't technically Cascade, but it kind of does the same thing. You get the one instance of exile because this is specifically reveal from the top of your library until you reach a card and then exile that card, and then you can play that card from exile.
Right.
But because generally you'll be demonstrating it, so one of your opponents will also be doing this, you're going to get at least 2. I mean, you're going to get 2. Maelstrom Colossus, Meteoric Mace, which just kind of seems nice. Having Meteoric Mace has Cascade, which is great. So that'll trigger for Laelia. And then also, it's an equipment that gives Trample, so that is also excellent. Throes of Chaos. But then you look at my custom list here for... I've got a header that says yes any price. These are cards that they exile from your library or graveyard, and it doesn't match up 1-to-1. So it is like exile X cards from the top of your library, for instance. But these are instances where because it's one instance of exiling, you'll get one trigger of Laelia.
Right. I mean, the first one on the list there is Arcslogger, and
yeah. Arcslogger is a 4/5, which, all right, sure, for 5 mana. It's fine on rate. For a single red mana, and exile the top 10 cards of your library from the game. Arcslogger deals 2 damage to any target or player. This is nice if you have no other way to exile other than attacking with Laelia. And it is definitely one of those things that makes me lean into not caring about what I'm exiling, because if I have the chance to mill myself, I've yet to mill myself in this deck.
Right.
If I have the chance
Arcslogger can make that.
Oh, happen. Absolutely. If I have the chance to mill myself, I'll do it. But it's nice too because it gives you a marginal benefit. Mm-hmm. This could very well close out the game. If you're, down to 2 people, you and one other person. The other person is at 4, and you just can't get through with your non-trampling creature. Just exile, 20 cards and boom, do 4 to their face. Unlikely scenario, but it happens.
Yeah.
You compare it to, say, Chaos Harlequin, which is 2 red for a 2/4. For red, remove the top card of your library from the game. If that card is a land, Chaos Harlequin gets -4/-0 until end of turn. Otherwise, it gets +2/+0 until end of turn. Now, it is 1-for-1, which is great. It is, you exile a card, and you get a +1/+1 counter. It's all separate instances of exiling.
Right.
The great thing with this is that it is essentially fire breathing for Laelia, but she gets the counters instead of of just until end of turn. You just put red into Chaos Harlequin.
Right.
It's never going to die to its own ability because it doesn't change its toughness.
It doesn't change the toughness. And you really don't care whether or not the Harlequin is a 2/4.
Right, a negative,
a 4/4, or a -16, right, or whatever.
Yeah, and you can do this as many times as you want. It is not pertinent to. It doesn't say you can only activate this once a turn or anything. So that's pretty nice. Some other things that I've got Kieran Archive and Elkin Bottle. Kieran Archive. This is the one that I feel like has shown up in almost every game that I've played this deck. And I think it was Josh was like, how do you always find this at the beginning of your game? It's 3 mana artifact from Mercadian Masks. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may remove the top card of your library from the game face down. You don't get to look at it.
Okay. And just to be clear, whenever you exile other cards, they're exiled face up.
Oh, yeah. It's always face up unless it says specifically face down. There are times, too, that if you exile it face down, the card will say you can look at this card, but this does not. Because for 5 mana and discard your hand and sacrifice Kieran Archive, put all cards removed from the game with Kieran Archive into their owner's hand. That's pretty good. You're triggering Laelia the beginning of your upkeep every turn.
Right.
So she's getting approximately 2 +1s each turn because it's from this and then from our attack. Sure, you don't get to know what is under the archive, but doesn't really matter. Because if you're going to pay the activated ability and discard your hand, well, I don't know what to tell you.
There's a good chance you're not actually activating this until you're almost out of cards in hand. So
I would
it's
say
just a way to build up another hand.
Yeah, and the thing and honestly, this is just similar to another card in this deck that is under the It Says Exile header. This is just Bowmat Courier, but not a creature. Right. Bowmat Courier says whenever it attacks, exile the top card of your library face down. And then for a single red, discard your hand. Sacrifice Bowmat Courier. Put all cards exiled into their owner's hands. This is much more interesting. So it's a 1/1 with haste that can come out on the battlefield to turn 1. Sure, whatever. So it's kind of, you start getting that card draw, or it's like layaway card draw. Unless it gets killed before you, just keep up 1 mana. It's fine. I had a game with Bowmat Courier last time I played this deck where it was facing a board wipe. So I just paid the 1, discarded my hand, picked up 5 lands, discarded some pretty good spells. Whoops. But something that I love is the insurance policy in this deck, which is Bag of Holding. For both of those, you're discarding the cards that you know in your hand. You're gambling to see what is under these artifacts. Bag of Holding says whenever you discard a card, exile it from your graveyard. And because you're exiling it from your graveyard, it triggers Laelia. So if you discard a card, it goes under the Bag of Holding.
Yeah.
And then you get a +1/+1. Says for 2 and tap, draw a card, then discard a card.
Right.
So you'll be triggering it. And then 4 tap and sacrifice the Bag of Holding, return all the cards back to your hand. So, you kind of pile it up for a while. Or as an insurance policy behind Bomat Courier and Kieran Archive, Bag of Holding just is very nice.
Sure.
And if you're holding up mana, granted, now that I have 6 instants in this deck, if you're holding up mana for whatever, or if you just don't use it all, you can at least get another trigger for Laelia,
right?
For 2 and tap.
Yeah.
So it's pretty sweet.
Back to the yes at any price column. I want to bring notice to Spine Rock Null.
Yeah.
Now I appreciate the whole point of Spine Rock Null is the Hideaway 4. And the card you put under it is exiled. Mm-hmm. So you're getting your instance of exile. It's a single +1/+1 counter for Laelia. In the greater scheme of things, it's really not that impressive.
Right.
But it's a land, folks.
Yeah.
And you're getting this benefit. Obviously, I was thinking about this card even before I saw it in your list because it does weird work in Grenzo.
Oh yeah.
So it queued for me, and to see it do weird work for your deck in the reverse manner, I just thought that was really cool. I like the idea that it was there, and Hostile Desert is another one that I liked as well.
So what I like about Hostile Desert is that I don't think I'm ever going to expect to activate it.
Right.
For Hostile Desert says 2 and exile a land from your graveyard. So, trigger Laelia. Great.
Right.
It becomes a 3/4 until end of turn. It's still a land. Sure. Okay. But the only reason I don't expect to activate it really all that often is because the only ways I can get land into the graveyard through the cards that I have in this list are 2 ways. 1, discarding to hand size end of turn.
Yeah.
2, retrace for Throes of Chaos.
Right. And I mean, if you want to, you can always put other lands that allow you to, sack the land to search for a land.
Right.
But there's just not a whole lot of reason to do that.
No. Especially with Valakut, I want to have...
You want to have...
the most amount of mountains I can.
Yeah. Oh, and I completely get that. It makes good sense. So.
Valakut is an artifact, not an artifact, but it's an artifact from a bygone deck that I used to have, which is why I have it. I don't think I'd go out and spend $26 on a land anytime soon. And
just to be clear, it's a land. It's not an artifact.
Right. I couldn't think of a better word to use. But speaking of Spine Rock Null, that's like a nice way to pivot into the other thing this deck wants to do, which I'll talk a little bit more after break. But Spine Rock Null also says for red and tap, you may play the exiled card without paying its mana cost if an opponent was dealt 7 or more damage this turn.
That's really not that hard with this deck.
It's not hard with this deck. I think the last time I played this was actually based on somebody else's damage, because you're playing
else did damage and you just had the mana up to pull it out.
Right. It takes 2 mana to play whatever. And the great thing about this too is that it gets rid of timing restrictions.
Right, because you can throw a sorcery under it and essentially get to play it at instant speed.
You can play sorceries, you can play artifacts,
anything,
creatures, which is just great. Planeswalkers, which I have 5 of. Mm-hmm. I've got 5 Chandras of, I don't know how many there are total, but these 5 were either ones that I had already had or just reasonably priced.
Right.
But Chandra generally is kind of the character that we see the most impulse draw from.
Right.
So I was like, hey, you know what? If I'm playing, a 4/5 mana, I guess most of them are 4. There's 3 4s and a 5 mana Planeswalkers. that I think each of them have an uptick ability that is Impulse Draw.
Right.
So if I'm getting it for free again, it's just a great little thing.
Yeah.
Even if I don't have Laelia on the board, it can help me ramp into paying more of Laelia's commander tags. Right. And honestly, that might be like the biggest issue I have with this deck, which again we'll talk about a little bit later, is once people start to see it as a threat, it's very easy to get rid of.
Right.
Or even just block.
Right.
But we'll talk about the ways I can get around those things after we get back from break. So we'll be right back. This episode of Temple of Falspod is brought to you by Thud. Thud, for all your throwing needs. Thud. Fling. Kazul's Fury. Well, Brian's Stout Arm can't fit here, but Thud. Think about it. Thud.
Thud. Thud.
Thud.
Thud.
Thud. Thud. Thud. Thud. Hey, we're back.
Hey.
So it's funny when I was putting this deck up online, I was trying to figure out the custom categories that I wanted to put in here, and I was like, oh, one of them will be Impulse Draw, just to see like there's a handful of cards in here that you play it and then it exiles the top of your library and then you can play those cards.
I bet there's at least 2 or 3 cards that do that.
I started dragging over one by one, and I want to say there was at least 30 by the time I was done. I decided that I probably need to be a little bit more sparing on, figuring out these categories. But, I mean, some of them are sorceries that do specifically that. Act on Impulse, Reckless Impulse. You get the idea. Tempered in Solitude. But I guess, I mean, even Tempered in Solitude has its restrictions. Valakut Exploration has its restrictions. Tectonic Giant also, when it enters or attacks. Sir Kara is when it deals damage to a player. Sir Kara is pretty sweet. I have yet to cast her, but she's 5 mana, 3/3 for Human Knight. Whenever Sir Kara the Bold or an instant or sorcery spell you control deals damage to a player, exile top card of your library, you may play that card this turn. And then you can just tap her to ping something. So she helps herself out, which is pretty sweet.
Yeah, that's nice.
One of my favorite in this deck, Furious Rise is actually pretty sweet. Furious Rise is an enchantment at the beginning of your end step if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, which after 2 attacks, sometimes even just 1 from Laelia, you've got power 4 or greater. Exile top card of your library, you may play that card until you exile another card with Furious Rise. So very similar to, like, I don't know, there's a lot of these.
Yeah.
A card that I've been wanting to put in here is the new Urabrask. A card that I've been thinking about cutting that's in this category is Dark Dweller Oracle. For 1 in a red, 2/2, creature Goblin Shaman. For 1 sacrifice a creature, exile top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. I don't really have creatures to spare. I'm okay if they're dead, but I'm not going to be actively sacrificing them to do this thing.
Right.
So most of the time, it's going to be 3 mana for a 2/2 that sees itself die, that sacrifices it to itself to do a single impulse draw, which, I mean, at that rate, Act on Impulse is the same price for 3 of those. They notably, though, Act on Impulse, you're exiling 3 cards. Dark Dweller Oracle, you're exiling 1 card. Both a single instance of exiling. So Laelia is only going to get one
counterfront in both situations. Yeah.
A card that when I was putting the list together, I was confused why it was in here, and I had to take a second to remember why I put it in here. Bergi, God of Storytelling. She's a 3/3. Whenever you cast a spell at a red, until end of turn, you don't lose this mana. As steps and phases end, creatures you control can boast twice during each of your turns rather than once. She's a 3/3 for 2 and a red. And I was like, I don't really care about mana too much in this deck.
Yeah.
Especially like storming off like she wants to do. But then I remembered she has a backside.
Yes.
The backside is Harnfell, Horn of Bounty for 4 and a red, which is pretty expensive for an artifact. But you can discard a card, exile the top 2 cards of your library. You may play those cards this turn. Again, just one instance of exiling, so you're only getting a 1. But you can discard your whole hand to, like, at instant speed, pump Laelia, which is pretty sweet.
Yeah.
And if you have Bag of Holding, you're getting 2 triggers because you're discarding. So it's going to be exiling the card that you're discarding and then also exiling from the top of your library. So it's neat little things like this that really go to show how fast and how big Laelia can get.
Right.
And that is kind of the whole thing of the deck is exile at any cost, commander damage at any cost.
Right.
Because one leads into the other. And I think for the most part, what I've learned from playing this deck is that I don't care what I'm exiling. So like things with like Kirin Archive, if somebody removes it, I don't care that I don't know what has left the game forever.
Right.
But one of my favorite things here is that you're just building her up so fast and so much that you'll see, you know, counters kind of just like start to tick up and tick up and tick up. And, you know, if somebody is like, oh, I'm not going to block, I'll just take the damage. If you have ways to pump her up, like with Harnfell,
right,
realistically, you can get to whatever commander damage you need to kill this person over 1 or 2 attacks.
Sure.
The hard thing is trying to build it up because, I mean, if you attack somebody for, say, I don't know, 10 commander damage, that means they only need 11 more. So if you attack them the next turn with Laelia, they're gonna not want to let it through.
Right.
So, you know, you're gonna attack. It goes up 1. It's the 11 that you need. But, you know, if they have even a single blocker, none of it gets through. Which is why I have do the big damage is this header. I've got Brash Taunter just because it's a sweet card. I love this card. Somebody's end of turn. Player to your right, end of turn. I tap Brash Taunter. It deals 1 damage to Laelia. Laelia deals damage, say 8 damage back to Brash Taunter, and then I can deal it how I wish to target opponent. It's pretty sweet. That said, everything else in this list is specifically to try to get Laelia to do as much damage to a person via combat damage.
Right.
Dragon Breath. It's a cheap little aura for 2 mana. Enchanted creature has haste, which Laelia already had haste, so okay. And it gives it fire breathing, and then whenever a creature with converted mana cost 6 or greater enters the battlefield, you may return Dragon Breath from your graveyard to the battlefield to attach that creature, which let me see. Do I have any of those, actually? I don't know. I'll have to look in I guess I'll look now. Converted mana cost 6 or less? 6 or more, sorry. Okay, there's Atali, and that's about it. But giving Atali haste, pretty good. Especially if you can give him fire breathing as well. Atali is actually one of my favorite includes in this deck because you're going to get a trigger because when he attacks, he exiles everybody, the top of everybody's library, including yours. So you're going to get one for that. And then you get a choice of some cards as well. Now that's the impulse draw I like to see.
Yeah, and when you don't have to pay the mana cost.
Yeah.
It's just...
you have a chance of playing some stuff that's not red, and I like that. So that's Dragon Breath. It's fine. You're never like, if it goes to the graveyard, it's pretty much gone. Ketis, Emberclaw Familiar. I love Ketis. I try to put him in every red deck I have. Ketis is a 1/1 from Commander Legends for 1 and a red. Whenever a commander you control deals combat damage to an opponent, it deals that much damage to each other opponent. The misconception here is that it's gonna do commander damage to everyone, but it's gonna do commander damage to one person, and then everybody else is also just gonna take that much damage.
Yeah, because this combat damage is just damage.
This is just damage from Ketis itself. Or I guess from your commander. And then I've got 2 cards here that are instants that it's 1 and an X that really hose your opponent. They both, if they're not expecting it, or even if they are, they're going to have a hard time blocking or figuring out how to deal with the situation. We've got Lunar Frenzy and Outmaneuver. Mm-hmm. Lunar Frenzy for a red and X.
Right.
Target creature you control gets +X/+0 and gains first strike and trample until end of turn.
Yeah.
The X, obviously, it's great. It gives it essentially fire breathing because it's just on the front end. But having first strike and trample, so even if you're just paying a single red for first strike and trample, is excellent because it's probably not something your opponent is going to realize until it's too late. To be able to turn okay blocks into advantageous for yourself is pretty good. To be able to probably kill their creature and then also get commander damage through for more is excellent. Outmaneuver. This is the card. So essentially, it's a red and X instant. X target blocked creatures deal combat damage to defending player instead of to blocking creatures this turn. Last turn of the game, you're like, okay, my opponent has...
Well, if this is going to do the combat damage to kill them with commander damage, why not?
Exactly.
Or if it's going to take them out of the game,
right?
Why not? I mean,
exactly.
Yeah.
The biggest problem I have with Outmaneuver is A, I haven't drawn it in a single game, and B, it's tough if like that person is a thing with Death Touch because the blocking creature is still going to deal damage back to Laelia, but sometimes it doesn't matter.
Right. Well, sometimes you just pay for it. The part I like about the Outmaneuver is whenever you see an X spell, the feeling is that, okay, so how big can I make X?
Right.
Well, in this deck, it doesn't matter. I mean, you're really using it for Laelia. Now, sure, there's going to be times when there's other creatures that are swinging in, but you're really using it for Laelia, and that means you only need to make it 1. It does say target, so you spend 2 mana, and Laelia essentially is unblocked. Yeah. Because that's how the damage is going to get dealt. The other nice part about Outmaneuver, in weird situations where you can use it while your opponents are in the middle of combat. Yeah. So if somebody has a particularly nasty creature that you want to see gone, it's like, oh, okay, well, yes, your creature does have first strike or Death Touch, but I'm going to play Outmaneuver and say that it was blocked, but in fact it's not going to do any of its damage to the creature you're blocking, and because it's not, that creature then gets to do combat damage back. Yeah. So there's, you can do all kinds of weird stuff that goes beyond the obvious one, which, to be fair, is what you're going to do almost every time.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, this deck, as the title entails, exile at any cost, commander damage at any cost. Yeah. It has a single objective, and I have learned, I've said this a few times now, I've learned that I don't care what I'm exiling. Now, I think this even is the case for things like Embercleave or Outmaneuver or Lunar Frenzy, is because, I mean, obviously with Lunar Frenzy, I think our play group has learned to expect that specific card from me. So they're always kind of preparing for it. But, even exiling your quote-unquote win con doesn't matter because Laelia herself is the win con.
Right.
And there's always more ways to pump her up. There's always ways to exile more.
Right.
Until you've got no more in your deck.
Right.
And I love that. Where this does fall apart is if somebody steals Laelia. There's no way you got nothing.
Right. I mean, the deck could, I think, probably use a few sack outlets, but the difficulty is you're throwing a sack outlet in there solely because you're trying to protect Laelia. It's not because you need it for anything else, and that's a little rough. So
yeah, this deck needs like a homeward path or I don't know, something along those lines. Finishing up this category, I've got Lightning Greaves on here.
Yeah.
Laelia already has haste.
Yeah.
It's for the Shroud.
Yeah.
Now, knowing that it's Shroud, I could have just as easily put Swiftfoot Boots in here. I probably, honestly, should have. But the 0 activation cost is kind of prime here.
Right.
And even though it has Shroud, so you can't target it with anything that we've been talking about. You can't target it with Outmaneuver. You can't target it with even Ember Cleave. But honestly, the protection that gives to Laelia from instants and sorceries is kind of where you need it to be. And she'll be getting bigger regardless. You don't need to target her to do Impulse Draw. So she'll be getting.
Is there a reason you didn't go with Swiftfoot Boots? Just the hexproof instead?
Is it?
It's hexproof haste.
How much to equip?
1.
Yeah, I think it is kind of
it's
really
the
there.
Okay.
Because I mean, after a while, like I've played Laelia for 12.
Right. Yeah.
It was worth it. I mean, she's 3 to begin with, so I guess it probably wasn't 12. It was probably like 11. But that's like being able to put her out and just attack is kind of what you need to do.
Right.
My favorite piece of kind of not really secret tech here is Squee the Immortal.
Right.
1 red for 2/1, you may cast Squee the Immortal from your graveyard or from exile. So you accidentally exile it, it's fine. You just play it.
Just play it out again.
Great. It dies, that's fine. You've got to. It gives you a blocker, and you can continue. Like your opponents need to team up to get any damage once Squeeze out, because if they are each attacking with one thing.
Yeah, somebody's going to get stopped by Squee, and then the next guy can get through. But it takes 2 opponents coordinating to make that happen.
To kind of wrap things up,
I have 2 questions.
Okay.
First one: there isn't a lot of ramp.
No. Should
there be more ramp, or has that not been an issue?
It hasn't been a super big issue.
Okay.
I think my opening hand kind of directs where the rest of my turns are going to go.
Right.
If I start to notice I'm petering out on mana, I become less aggressive. I start to kind of build up, the creatures I can, that kind of thing. If I do get, if I continue to make my land drops, especially with all of the impulse draw I have, and I think that's kind of where it really shines, is that because there's so much impulse draw, I'm never going to be short on land.
Right.
Except for those rare cases that I just don't. But that's the thing, is that those are rare cases. Those games are always going to happen regardless. And I think the biggest thing here is that I have so many ways to play cards for free.
Right.
I've got Cascade. I've got, Atali.
Right, and it's not like you're exiling 4 cards with Laelia each turn, and then you have to try and find the mana to play them all. So,
and that's the other thing too. With this impulse draw is that I don't have to play these cards. I'm getting a benefit just from them being exiled.
Yeah.
Playing them is just a bonus. As seen with some of the older cards, I'm exiling cards willy-nilly at any cost.
Right.
I don't care what they are. Sometimes they're face down.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter to me.
Yeah,
I just want to make Laelia bigger.
Counter.
That said, I only have 6 cards that are above six or above.
Yeah.
So
you don't tend to need a lot of mana.
Yeah.
So.
I'm going to be I'm not generally going to be double spelling.
Right.
Sometimes I'll be keeping up 2 mana just to either fake having Tybalt's Trickery.
My last question, and I think you pretty much already answered this, is have you thought about trying to control the top of the deck so you know what card you're going to exile? I mean, I'm just thinking about Sensei's Divining Top.
Right. Sensei's Divining Top is what, $70?
Yeah, it's not cheap.
So not now. If I inherit one, yeah.
Yeah.
And by inherit, I mean crack in a pack, or God forbid, there's like a secret layer where for $30 I can get that and 2 other cards or something.
Yeah.
I know it's part of the list now, which is pretty sweet.
Okay.
So the chances are higher. But I think the thing with effects like that is that it just slows down my play. And I'm already putting a big enough target on my back by constantly attacking people, and that's not something that I know a lot of play groups want.
Right.
Is like somebody always attacking.
Yeah.
But it's it would be a smart idea. But speaking of smart, the smartest thing I did was realize there's a little mechanic in Commander Legends 1 that I wish there were more cards with. You'll find it on cards like Impulsive Pilferer called Encore. So Encore is cost whatever. It's Encore X. So X is the cost. Pay the cost and exile this card from your graveyard. For each opponent, create a token copy that attacks that opponent this turn, if able. They gain haste, sacrifice them at the beginning of the next end step, activate only as a sorcery. That last part, whatever. You get to exile a card from your graveyard just because.
Right.
You get to make copies, so like Impulsive Pilferer, hopefully you get 3 copies.
Yeah.
And then you get 3 treasures when they die, because that's what this card does. I think there's one other card in here. There's not a lot of red, just mono red that has this, but I hope they bring this mechanic back at some point. I don't think they are with Baldur's Gate 2, but I mean, Commander Legends 2, Baldur's Gate. But we'll see. I really liked those 2 includes. Nice. I think the other one's called Boarding Party or something. But
yeah,
it's pretty cool. But I could talk for hours about this deck. So instead, I'm going to shuffle up and play it.
Sounds good.
Thank you so much for listening. We're Temple of Falsepod, where our decks are not optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun. I'm Andy.
I'm Bruce.
Again, thank you for listening. Have a great night, and may your 5th land be the Temple.
Bye!
Wait, before you go, just wanted to say thank you for listening. You can reach out to us via email at falsepodmtg@gmail.com or on Twitter @falsepodmtg. Bruce is @manaburned, and I'm @AndyWeekend, though you'll definitely notice I use the podcast Twitter far more often. Now that we've got you here, make sure you subscribe, like, rate us on whatever podcast platform you use. It helps us out. It gets us more reach. Subscribe to us on our YouTube channel. Like a video there. Leave some comments for more casual enjoyment. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back with some more timeless discussions about all things casual. So come hang out, and may your 5th land be the Temple. Bye-bye. Should I do my best, Bruce? Bye!